So, hi, thank you for being here with me today. I want to give our audience a little bit information, whatever you're comfortable sharing about you and your patient story so they can get to know you a little better.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Kate. I am a physical therapist and run and strength coach. So, my chronic illness story is lengthy, as most people's is, of course. I always experienced some symptoms of hypermobility, especially my shoulders, throughout my life, but it was never really an issue. I was able to run cross country through high school and all of that. My senior year, I was diagnosed with chronic migraine, which came on relatively suddenly. So that was my first step into the chronic illness, chronic pain world. Luckily, I was really able to get that controlled with Botox and a bunch of other medications. I was able to get through college and grad school with maybe experiencing one to two, probably one to four migraines a month and migraine attacks, I should say. And, I was living a relatively normal life at this point.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, things fell off the rails about like 6 to 8 months into working my first full time job as an outpatient orthopedic physical therapist. This was after I had a bout of COVID, couple bouts of COVID that left me with some symptom changes, which at the time I was attributing just to migraine as that was my diagnosis at the time. Uh, I was really lucky to have a very supportive boyfriend, now my husband, who said, please quit your job. Like, this isn't working. We need to figure out something. I couldn't get through a day. I just remember like waking up at 5 a.m. just sobbing. um,
We've all had those moments. They're horrible.
right. And it's like, how am I going to get through a 10-hour stacked patient day where
Oof, yeah.
I'm trying to, pretend like I'm not in horrible pain while I'm helping other people, with their pain.
Yeah.
So it just obviously wasn't working. At that point in time, I was already coaching some runners. So decided to kind of go all in with that so that I was able to be really flexible with my schedule and take care of myself because it was obvious that some other things were starting to go on.
Mhm.
Uh, I believe it was 2 years after this. So after lots of doctor visits, lots of research, all of these things, I received my diagnosis of hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I also received a diagnosis of POTS. And at that time, like I said, my symptoms kind of through my life I had been experiencing, but it was always one of those, oh, my body is just weird,
Yeah.
that type of thing. When I got that EDS diagnosis, everything just made sense. And especially everything that I was experiencing that was new to me over the
Mhm.
couple of years, just so many, things that I was like, this isn't just chronic migraine anymore.
Yeah.
And likely that chronic migraine was kind of that first sign, since I have cervical instability. So, uh, that is kind of my own health story. Luckily, I've been doing my full time run coaching for over 4 years at this point,
Mhm.
and I have been able to find a balance of, being able to sort of work in the field. I'm not working as a physical therapist, so I'm more working in the coaching realm, but I'm working with other runners living with chronic illness, which is super cool.
Yeah, and that's how I found you, in some other conversations with other people who are active and have chronic illnesses or have been through some shit, right? And I feel like that's how I always get connected. I'm like, we always are getting together, like, you too. It's like that stepbrothers moment, like, did we just become best friends? Like, that's how I feel in this space with a lot of people who are trying to especially be active when you have all these other things going on. And there's no how-to guide. There's no manual. And you can go to somebody who may be a physical therapist who is well-intended need to want to help you, but just doesn't know how. So it leaves us figuring out a lot of things on our own. So when, especially for me, to come into contact with somebody who gets it on both sides of that is really interesting, because I know, and I think we had talked about this before, that like if I have these questions, if I'm looking for this, somebody else out there is looking for this too. So how do we connect the greater community with these people who may not have all the answers, but have figured out some of the steps, or at the bare minimum been able to figure out how to connect a couple of those dots, or at least just help you take those few steps forward. And I've gotten messages before where people are like, do you know somebody who can help me with this? And I'm like, no, but I can try to find somebody, and it's just, there's that guideline that even for like our regular chronic illnesses, half the time there are no guidelines for that. And they're like, have you tried this? Or let's give this a try. And we're just kind of sitting there in constant trial and error. So when you get into a spot where it is still trial and error, but you feel a little more settled in that space. And I imagine for you, with your own journey of trying to figure things out, that has kind of bled into how you treat your clients, whether they're runners or they're looking at strength training and running, or they're completely new and they're like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I was never a runner. I was never a lifter. This just looks like a really good way to torture myself. Can you help me? That's how I started. So
That's funny.
it's like it's interesting. We all find a way. It's like we want to control the suffering a little bit, and I think we naturally just kind of go into this realm, and then people look at you, they're like, how do you do that? What do you like, what made you do that? And I'm like, I don't know, and I don't know. I'm just here figuring it out.
I'm just here to do it. No, but you make a good point about, that kind of network of
Mhm.
people, providers, clinicians, other patients with lived experience, that we all kind of are building that network to
Yeah.
be able to connect people with, because, oftentimes a lot of us are having a hard time with the standard medical system. Not saying, I mean, I utilize my doctors all the time, but
Mhm.
I think that a lot of us just seek, some of these maybe more complex or specific, seeking out these answers after kind of hitting a roadblock of like, well,
Mm.
my doctor told me to exercise, but I don't really know what that like means.
Yeah.
Because for so many of us with chronic illness and chronic pain, we know that exercise is beneficial, but
Mhm.
how the heck do we do it in a way that isn't
Doesn't hurt yourself.
detrimental?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, over the weekend, I somehow managed to hurt my back, and I was in so much pain, like crippled, like what did I even do? And I knew I had a long run scheduled this weekend too. It did not happen. And it was one of those situations where I can almost guarantee you that if I called the doctor and said, like, I'm in X amount of pain, like, what do I do? They'll say, just, heat, ice, rest. And I'm like, while that's not bad advice, I know that's not the only advice. So what I ended up doing was my usual of just walking, and, low impact, very slow, not doing anything heavy. And the only time I wasn't in pain was when I was moving. But, like,
Mhm.
that's not your general advice. That's not the general thing that someone will tell you to do. They'll say rest. I alternated between the two. And now for me, that comes with years of not doing that, and either staying still and being so afraid to move, to the complete opposite of ignoring the pain and making it worse, to that in between of like, do I listen to my body? What is my body telling me to do? And that in itself is not really taught anywhere. Like, you will teach your clients that. I've had some great physical therapists that will teach their clients that. They were like, you're not supposed to be in pain, Sam. And I'm like, what? They're like, to the pain, not through it. And I'm like, but so I've been doing this wrong forever, so that way of like reading your body, understanding what's happening and giving the if you can't do this mentality. And if this is so painful, stop and do this. Like that's not really taught unless you ask. But if you don't know to ask, you're never given that information.
Absolutely. And it becomes this very black and white of, okay, well, you're in pain, so just don't do anything. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, well, then what should I do, like, to get back to what I was doing? Because I
Mm-hmm.
can't just, stop, start, stop, start, stop, start all the
Yeah.
time. Uh, so those little more nuanced kind of ideas of modification, I like to use the stoplight method with my clients. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just a very basic way to self reflect and kind of decide, am I going to move forward with the plan as written, or am I going to modify, or am I going to take full rest? So the way that I like to look at it is green is baseline. This is my baseline, not necessarily pain free because not all of
Mm-hmm.
us are pain free all the time, or symptom
Wait,
free all the
people are
time.
pain free?
Isn't
What?
that nuts?
What?
It's shocking to me that that's normal.
Like that's a thing?
I
Okay.
know, it's crazy. Can't remember at a time. But this is like baseline, so say like maybe like 2 or 3 on a pain scale, like
Mm-hmm.
personally for like my head. Um, you know, my symptoms aren't changing. Everything is kind of my baseline normal. I can go ahead with
Mm-hmm.
the routine as planned. Yellow would be more moderate symptoms, maybe on a pain scale getting more up to like a 5, maybe a 6.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of, my symptoms are a little higher than they usually are. I am going to choose to modify. So this would have been you the other day. Like, okay, I hurt my
Mm-hmm.
back and, but I still feel like I can,
Move.
move, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
even movement feels good.
Mm-hmm.
Like you mentioned. So at this point I would say, okay, let's modify. So if you have a run planned, let's either shorten the run or swap it for a walk, which is exactly what you did, or
Yep.
a cycle or something like that. If you have a lift planned, let's shorten it. So let's do, less sets. Let's do less exercises. Maybe we're just going to do 1 or 2 exercises. And you can also choose to, move things around on these days. And then the red would be I have more severe symptoms, like over a 6 out of 10. If you pain scale's so silly, but just kind of generally,
Mm-hmm.
my symptoms are much more severe. Uh, I need to take a rest day. And I think the most important part about this is once you decide that, you have to stick with that and feel confident about it, because when we're resting and feeling guilty about it the whole time and beating
Mm-hmm.
ourselves up about it, it's really not restful rest,
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm still learning that one.
you
But it's so
it's
true.
it's still stress on your body, and your
Yeah.
body doesn't necessarily know the difference between physical and emotional stress. So we need to decrease that stress level.
Mm-hmm.
And on these days, it doesn't necessarily have to mean like you're on bed rest. You could choose to do some gentle breathing exercises lying down, something like that. You may choose to stick with some of your like more rehab exercises. Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'll do some of my neck exercises lying down on a day like this. But sometimes it literally is like I'm on the couch,
Yep.
and that's that. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think that all or nothing mindset, like I get stuck in it. And I think a lot of us get stuck in it because that in between is never, again, you're not taught that. It's like you get this diagnosis and you have this thing, which means that something that you either used to be able to do or maybe that you dreamed of doing is now unattainable. And that's not always true. And I've talked about this a lot, like just in my personal life and when I've talked about my own experiences, that the biggest piece of trying to figure anything out is that it's not always going to be the way that you thought it was going to be, and you have to learn to be okay with that. Like you have to. And there's no getting around that. There's no like you if you're not okay with it, then you're just miserable. So your only choice is to be okay with whatever the outcome is. I know for me right now, training for my half, I'm like I do not care what I have to do. I'm going to keep pushing forward. Like it's going to have to be a full like Sam someone sit me down to stop me from doing this. But that also comes with the years of experience of learning how to figure out when I'm at that point. And I realized over this past weekend where I have this long run, I can't do it. I am beyond pissed off. I'm upset. Like every emotion, I'm going through it. I'm sitting here like, all right, if I go out right now, am I going to be okay? Like, is this going to hurt me? And it got me to a point where I'm like, if I push it now and I injure myself, I can't do it next week. But if I rest now and do mild movement, take some time, take some rest, and then do easy runs throughout the week to my next long run is going to just be harder, not impossible. But if I push right now and I hurt so bad that I step wrong, I twist wrong, I do anything, I'm completely screwing myself. And I'm like, okay, I need to be okay with this, and I am still working on being okay with it. But that's that mindset work, that piece of living with chronic illness, whether the thing that you want to do is just getting up out of bed, taking a shower, and walking to the mailbox and coming back in. Like, if that is your activity, that is just as valid as anything else. And that is just as like important as something to work through as anything else. And I know like mindset work for you is very big for yourself with your clients and just something that you talk about in general that has shaped who you are as a patient and who you are as a provider and a coach. So all of those things put together can really set you up for success, even when from the outside looking in, it looks like unsuccessful or it looks like it didn't work out. But in reality, it did. It's just that your mindset or somebody else's mindset or how they're looking at the situation isn't how you're attacking it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's difficult, especially when if you're someone who previously was an athlete and then became chronically ill and then
Mhm.
are dealing with this kind of identity crisis. Uh, I think it's really important to be able to, manage expectations and realizing that accepting the reality of your limitations
Mhm.
is not giving up. It's just meeting yourself where you're at.
Yes.
Uh, I think
So
that's a
much.
very important thing to remember, and that your training is gonna look totally different. Like, it's progress is not linear in general, but especially when you're dealing with a dynamic disability, and I think we have in our minds this one way of what training or what exercise or movement looks like,
Mhm.
and that's not always the reality for us.
Yeah. That entire mindset of it has to be this way, when you get so stuck in it, we end up limiting ourselves when we're trying to go and say, I don't have my limits. I can do anything. Like, it doesn't matter that I'm sick. I can do whatever I want. Yeah, I got that attitude too sometimes. Like, and sometimes it's good to live in there because you don't want to say something is impossible. But by not acknowledging that sometimes things actually are impossible, like, you are limiting yourself because you're shutting off all these other pathways, these other opportunities, maybe this other movement, this other sport, or this other something, whatever that is, that you actually could do that you now aren't doing because you're so stuck in that one mindset. And that's So that is so limiting in itself, and I know because 'cause I've been there. I actively fight against it all the time, and it's so hard to even explain that to somebody who has never been there or never thought about that situation, or honestly, you feel too emotional and maybe too angry to be out of that situation, and that's valid. Like, sometimes it takes us a long time to get out of that. It did for me.
Totally. There's so much of, like, letting go of your ego when you are, kind of accepting these things. For me personally, I used to be that kind of runner that was like, "Oh, it only counts if it's if 3 miles or more," which
Yeah.
is so stupid, but, that was young runner mindset. And, then going to a place where I'm like, I can barely walk for 10 minutes.
Mhm.
And, it just felt so completely foreign to me, and trying to change that mindset from, like, grinding and has to be like, it doesn't count unless it's a 3-mile run,
Yeah.
to, validating myself in, like, yes, I walked 10 minutes, like, I
Mhm.
made it. I built up to that. And, this
Yeah.
morning I walked 2 miles, which is awesome.
Mhm.
So it, you know, and maybe I wouldn't have made that progress if I just continued to bog myself down with, like, well, this doesn't count, or,
Yeah.
whatever. But that incremental progress is made when we do kind of suspend that ego a little bit and take those baby steps,
Mhm.
because we all know that pushing through, uh, especially long term, is just a recipe for injury, burnout,
Yeah.
flare, all of those things.
Yeah. I know. And even in that, like, that mental barrier, talking about, that compared to your physical barriers too, because our physical barriers are never gonna go away. We can kind of adjust them, we can find ways around them, but I think we forget that you can adapt that same, like, take to your mental barriers. And, like, I look back at what I used to be able to do, and I'm like, "Man, like, I used to be good at this. Like, I used to be able to do this. Like, why do you suck right now? Like, why is this so bad? Like, you're so slow. This is so stupid." And I've noticed that the moment that thought, like, is finished in my head, I'm like, "Wow, that was harsh. Like, let's take a moment." Like, I still have those thoughts, but I think I've worked through so many, like, falls, literally and figuratively, of so much of these limitations, these things that were well out of my control, that I'm like, I have to do something to be able to adapt to this. I can't keep comparing what I am now to who I was then, because the me now is not that person. That person doesn't even exist anymore. So why am I comparing my output now to that output? We live totally different lives. Like, this body is 5 years older. It's heavier. It's more tired. It's been through more shit. Like, of course it's going to be a bit slower, but it's still here. And I'm like, okay,
Yes.
you don't get to be mean to yourself today. You still showed up. Your body still showed up today. It's broken, it's cracked, it's fallen apart. It wants to go back to bed, and you pushed it anyway, and it's barely
Mhm.
complaining. So, like, take a moment and recognize to say, I'm still showing up. I'm still here. Even if it's 3 miles versus 10 miles, those 3 miles are still valid. Those 10 minutes are still valid. Those 2 minutes of movement, that is still valid. The fact that you got up today and you are doing what you can to make yourself feel better, still valid. Why are we so harsh about that?
It's so true. And, that negative self-talk is something that, a lot of my clients deal with, and I deal with or have dealt with in the past. And, when I started going through these experiences, I had a total crisis of character.
Mhm.
Who am I without consistent running and exercise? I had
Yep.
been I was a three-sport athlete through high school. I ran half marathons in college. I just I was always one of those people that was like, I don't understand how people don't have a consistent exercise
Mhm.
routine. And that totally came from a place of privilege of me just not understanding. But, I really had to learn what I like about myself outside of it, athletic achievement and performance.
Yeah.
I did a lot of work to untangle my self-worth from all of that because I really did my self-worth was really tied to what I could physically do, which just, wasn't going to work for me anymore. So, being able to do that work of, not necessarily completely suspending negative self-talk, like you said, it comes in, but,
Mhm.
combating it and being like, no, weird thought, like we don't
Like,
think that way.
this
Uh,
isn't welcome here.
not nice. And then like replace it with a positive, I think is something that can be really important. And you mentioned that comparison to past self and past performances. I
Mhm.
think that's one of the some of the biggest, those emotional barriers versus physical ones I see is that comparison to past self and others.
Mhm.
Having unrealistic expectations for their current situation, poor past experience with exercise and movement, and fear of
Mhm.
failure.
Yep. Yep. I can tell you that fear of failure with me right now is huge, huge, because I'm like, can I do this? Like, I haven't done this in so long. Every single year I have said, I want to run another half marathon. I'm going to do this. Like, I don't care how hard it is. I'm going to do this. And I keep trying and I kept failing. I kept failing and I would get a little bit further and I would fail, a little bit further and I would fail, but I don't believe that I actually failed. Like, I can say that knowing that I'm not being negative or harsh on myself. And I'm like, I failed at doing that. Like, it's okay. Like, we don't always have to achieve everything. We don't always have to do everything. Failure doesn't automatically mean like loser, right? Failure just means you didn't get exactly what you set out to achieve. But that in
Mhm.
itself does not mean loser. It doesn't mean that you suck. And I had to get out of that mindset. And I'm like, I really hope I can do this. Like every time I go do something and it's hard, I'm like, can I do this? Like I get in my own head and it's so difficult. But the thing for me that helped was just acknowledging showing up and just acknowledging the effort. And, sometimes my 100% effort is like only 40% output because that's all I got. And if that's
Yep.
all you have, but you're choosing to use every ounce of that to be better, no matter what it is that you're doing, whether it's a physical game, a mental game, a combination of both, or just frankly trying to survive the day, you were doing amazing. And I think we get so wrapped up, just like you said, in these achievements, in what can we do? Or, well, that person is sicker than me and she could do it, which I've gotten in that headspace. It's a terrible space to be in. Or, I used to be able to do that. Why can't I do this now? And it's just like, those things don't matter. And you have to find those ways to really drown out that noise. It sounds so easy. I still really struggle with that and have to constantly reframe every thought that comes into my head or it comes in. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to sit with that for a minute. I'm just going to sit with it. All right, I'm done. And then like pick up and go do something else.
And I think that's a good strategy. I mean, all you can really do is just try to be aware and
Mhm.
address those thoughts. A couple things that came to mind when you were speaking there is, the idea of what really is failure, like reframing failure
Yeah.
and what that means. Does that just mean that I, didn't finish my race? Does that mean that, because to me, there's no failure in training
Uh-huh.
and, maybe not making it to that goal race or DNFing that race or whatever it is. Is it a failure that, you were able to train, for go through this training and reflect back on your training and see what you were able to do? I think
Yeah.
with racing and being chronically ill, it is so difficult because we cannot control how we show up on that specific race day.
Yeah.
This is true for all runners in general, but you cannot control. I mean, there's only so many things that you can do to control how you feel on race day. And that
Mhm.
also includes the environment, like the weather, things like that.
Yeah.
There's so much out of our control that I try to place more emphasis on the process than the outcome,
Yes.
making those process goals of like, you know, my goal is to, train for this race and, you know, that, mission achieved, like, regardless of what the race outcome is.
Yep.
So I think that's something really important to remember too is that, like, the race is one snapshot and it does not give the whole picture of who you are as a runner.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask, because we're two people with chronic illnesses, with experience in the exercise of it all, specifically with running, but in the exercise of it all. And I know that, like, with my providers and when I talk to other people, they're usually they ask, like, how do you do that? But usually they're pretty supportive in that. Now, I know that's not the case for everybody, and usually fear on the patient and the provider side, whatever that, exercise might be. Like, yes, their contact sports might not be good for somebody, like with EDS, like maybe pick a different sport. But, it's one of those things, if you're really passionate about doing this specific thing, like how can we make that work? Like how or what would you suggest to somebody who wants to bring up, like, hey, I have chronic disease and I want to exercise? Like, what do I do? Where do I start? Maybe how to approach that conversation with yourself and then a provider to really say, this is scary. Let's acknowledge this. I don't know where to start, but how do you kind of make that first jump to say, this is scary, but I wanna try it anyway. Where do I go? Or what do I start with?
That's a great question. I think that a lot of providers and in general, there's this misconception that things like running and lifting are unsafe,
Mhm.
for people in hypermobile bodies, but in reality, strength training is like the best thing you can do for hypermobile
Yeah,
joints.
yeah.
Um, and I'll put it out there. Running isn't for everyone. And like if you don't like running, you don't have to run. Uh,
Yeah.
but exercises shouldn't be off the table across the board. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people think that safe movement is just a bunch of floor exercises, which might be where you start. Uh, but I think that if you're going to bring this up with your provider, I would personally try to come in with some information potentially. And I'm saying that without being like, oh, here's how to find it. But coming to the table, maybe just having read up and looked into some things and saying, I know that this might not be your typical recommendation, but this is what I'm able to do right now. Here's
Mhm.
what I'm thinking about doing. And that should really meet yourself where you're at.
Yeah.
And just ask what they think. And if, hopefully, if it's a good provider, they're going to be willing to learn with you, listen, and provide some of that guidance.
Mhm.
Um, I do also think that there's something to be said about working with a coach who can kind of give that broad overview, be able to provide guidance and programming so that you're not worrying about whether you're doing too much or pacing
Yeah.
yourself incorrectly or XYZ. But I think that, that first step is just starting to look into uh, some different references and, myself is one. There are a lot of awesome, providers out there who are clinicians who also live with hypermobility or just
Mhm.
clinicians specializing in it. So I think that it sounds weird telling people to go look, at some social media accounts, but there are some really good ones out there. There are some bad ones out there too, but
Yeah, that's everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know that I found a lot of my, like, recommendations or something that I decided I wanted to try because someone like you shared something on social media, where because where else are we going to look? We want, like, yes, you do want the evidence-based information. You do want the clinical providers and you want the tried and true studied scientific stuff over here. There's a time and a place for all of it. But nothing beats lived experience. And for me, when I want to know, like, is this possible for me? Like when I had a feeding tube and I wanted to run, I'm like, can I run with a feeding tube? Well, my doctor didn't have a feeding tube, so he couldn't actively tell me if I could run with a feeding tube. I had to go find other people that talked about their experience running with a feeding tube. Now, my provider was very good and very encouraging about how to do things safely within what he was able to provide. He was a runner too, so it also helped where he understood like where that desire came from. But it's this is just the way of the world now. This is where you find information, and we all just have to, again, be smart enough to the best of our ability to discern between what is good advice and what is bad advice. And to look at just because this worked for Sam and this worked for Kate doesn't mean it's going to work for me. But if I take what they learned and maybe figure out how can I apply this to my situation and take that to your doctor to say, like, I want to lift weights. Okay. Well, you don't start Olympic lifting the next day. You don't join a bodybuilding program the next day. Maybe you start with bands just to
Mhm.
get the proper form down. Maybe, you ask if you can go see a physical therapist and then you search in the area to see, do the physical therapists in your area offer anything? Are there virtual, programs that you can find? And it always comes back. The burden is always on us. That will never change. The burden is always on the dang patient, and that will never change. But I think that burden lessens when you go into that provider or into the situation, like you said, having either some questions, some resources, or at least an idea of what you're looking for. So that way, your provider hopefully won't just be like, "No, you're not doing that." "Well, why?" "'Cause I told you to."
Exactly. I think it
"Okay."
just lends to more of a conversation, like
Yeah.
kind of like, hey, I'm leveling with you here. Like, I've brought some information. Like, let's have a,
Mhm.
conversation. So, uh, that I think is a good first step.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is kind of weird that we almost can find better information through reputable providers online. Just
Yeah.
like you said, lived experience is really important. I think that's something that really helps me relate and empathize with my clients, and also
Mhm.
something that brings people to me.
Yeah. Now, with movement and the days where you were saying, like, "No," or "I can't do this," and you're going to your doctor, you don't know what to do, everything is changing, you really feel like everything's falling apart. At that point, maybe restarting, where would you like, if this happened to you, and I know it's happened to me too, and I don't really know where to start half the time. Like, what would be the first thing that you do for yourself to say, okay, the thing that used to work isn't working now. So now I have to pivot. Like, I figured all these things out. Everyone was on board. All the stuff worked, and I'm trying it now, and I don't know what to do. Have you
Mhm.
had one of those moments, and what did you do to maybe start to figure out something different? Like, what was your pivot in that situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like this has happened a couple times.
To
And
most of us, it probably has.
so, I mean, for example, like going from, maybe a period of a few months of almost no activity
Mhm.
past like home ambulation and maybe, like you mentioned, going to the mailbox or something like that. Uh, you know, the first thing that I would be starting with would be just some kind of movement isn't that I know isn't gonna be taxing. So for me, this might be, and I have this at home. I bought like a little recumbent bike pedal
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
So yeah, so my very first thing is always like, okay, I'm sitting on the couch and this her name's Hope. Her last name starts with a Z. And she coined this term cozy cardio. I don't know
I
if you've
love
heard
it.
of it.
I
Cozy
haven't,
cardio.
but I love
It's
that.
so it's so nice. You have, like, your lights low. Maybe you're doing in the morning when it's, like, dark. You have your lights low. I have fun colored lights, put on
Mhm.
a cozy TV show, and I'm sitting there cycling,
That's
not
amazing.
not trying to get my heart rate up. I'm just
Yeah.
moving, and maybe I'm just trying to do it for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And, I'm gonna do that a few times a week for a couple weeks and see how I feel. And maybe I'm also integrating some very, like, gentle, more rehab-based kind of resistance training, strength moves, that
Mhm.
type of thing. There's things at home. And I'm gonna do that for a few weeks before I make any changes, just because I want to track any trends over time and just see how am I responding to this.
Yeah.
Um, and it takes a little bit of time to kind of realize that.
Mhm.
Uh, and then, once I'm able to tolerate meaning I'm recovering well from, and I'm not having any repercussions or symptom related flares, or not
Yeah.
symptom related flares, sorry, activity related flares is what I meant there.
Mhm.
Um, then I'll increase gradually. And once I'm able to tolerate, say 20, 30 minutes on a recumbent bike, then I'm going to transition to my little walking pad that I have over there.
Mhm.
So it's just a very gradual increase of, volume intensity over time, but it's not graded, meaning it's increasing like over time at increments.
Yeah.
It's based on how I feel. So it's like, okay, increase. Okay. Okay. Maybe we need to decrease back down for a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that kind of training plan that you look at that is
Mhm.
increasing every week or every other week, etc. So that, I don't know if that answers your question, but that is kind
Yeah.
of the general picture of, for me, what I've experienced before. And I think this literally happened to me last winter, where I went through a period of time where I was just completely inactive and then
Mhm.
trying to get back into some movement. That's really what it looked like.
Yeah, it's a lot of biofeedback is what it sounds like, is really focusing on that. And I think, and the reason I bring it up too is because a lot of people just, you don't know where to start, or you don't know where to restart because that fear sets in again, like what we were talking about earlier of, is this going to hurt me? What do I
Hmm.
do? What if I do too much? What if I don't do enough? And you get caught up in that you actually like forget to start because it's so
Yeah.
scary and you don't know what to do. And the guidance is so little that you're just like, I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't
You
know
get
what to
that
do."
you get that fear avoidance. And I
Yeah.
think, it's so important to remember just trying to find that point of entry for you. And it is going to
Hmm.
feel like you're not doing enough. It's going to feel like you're not doing anything. It's
Yeah.
how it should feel in the
Yeah.
beginning. Um, you know, we're not looking to come out of the movement session with like high heart rate and like
Hmm.
breaking a sweat. Uh, but I think it's also important to think of exercise as a dial that we
Mm.
can turn down and turn back up regarding, depending on our situation and what we need,
Yeah.
versus an on-off switch where we're having to
Mm.
start and stop and start and stop all over again. So sometimes that can kind of help us think about what we need to do. Okay, well, I'm just dialing it down. How can I dial down the things that I was doing previously, and what might that look like?
Yeah, that's a really good, like, visual, even, like, for me thinking about that, because I do feel a lot of that start and stop when I look at, like, where I was running last year to the year before, and it's like there was just months and months and months and months of no running, and then it was like a little blip, and then months and months and months of no running, and it has felt like a start and stop, and I think that you're right, if you can kind of visualize that a little differently, and that goes all back to mindset work. Like we focus so much that exercise and all of these things is physical and that's it. But in all reality, there's so much more mental work that goes into it because I know that if I'm like, man, I'm really tired, my legs are really heavy, suddenly my legs feel heavier when they weren't really that heavy. Or, wow, this really sucks. Why am I doing this? Guess what? It's going to get harder. So we forget how connected our brains are to what we're able to do and not do, that the more we focus on that, the more you're like, okay, I'm not stopping, I'm just slowing down. And I tell myself
Mhm.
that a lot where I'm like, man, this is hard. I want to quit. I'm like, you can slow down, but you can't quit. You can
Yeah.
be in a shuffle. I don't care if you're crawling, you can shuffle, you can do whatever you got to do. You just don't get to stop.
Yeah.
Unless it's, like, going to hurt you, you know, and I have trouble finding that line sometimes, you know, but the worst part for me is that line's always changing. It's like I can't ever catch it. So in a moment, you have to make those judgments, and I think the only way you learn how to do that is by actually doing it. You know, our limits are not going to be the same day to day. What you can do right now is going to be different than you can do tomorrow and the next day and a year from now and 3 years ago, you know, prior to now. So I
Mhm.
think really being able to hear somebody say, like, it's okay to look and be different. It's okay if you have to stop because your body is telling you to stop without feeling like a failure. Like, these are the conversations that people need to hear, not the, no, running is bad for your joints. You can't do this. This is really bad for you. You're going to hurt your knees. Like, okay, but what if I strength train and I strengthen my joints? I mean, strength training is dangerous. You shouldn't do that. So what do I do? Sit at home and rot. It's like, we've all heard that at one point or another. Like, not all physicians are like that, but we have all heard, like, don't do that. It's bad for you. Well, so what do I do? I don't know. Just don't do that. Well, but I would like to, don't do anything. S-
Yeah.
So what do I do?
Yeah, and there's so much of especially with, like, the the training side of things, I feel like I do so much of that undoing of harm that other
Yeah.
clinicians have done, and the way that we perceive exercise and
Hmm.
our preconceived notions and ideas of what this is gonna be like and what yeah, there's just a lot of fear mongering in that department, and in the impact cardio department as
Hmm.
well in the chronic illness space. But I think more people than not have heard that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it keeps a lot of us from wanting to ask more questions and just to do more. Like, I stopped asking for permission
Yes.
because I just couldn't put myself in a position to hear no. It was, "Hey, I'm trying this, like, you can get on board and help me figure out what to do here." And I'm not actively saying that's the right approach for everybody, it's just the right approach for me, that I stopped
Mhm.
doing that because once I got that fear in my head, it made me struggle to even want to try to do something the next time. And it was a struggle to try to figure out, like, can I actually do this? Because somebody got in my head making me think like maybe I shouldn't be doing this. You don't get to decide that. I get to decide that. So I want to be free to make that decision. And I think that that's where that connection and that communication with your clinical teams, with, you know, all of your providers that are taking care of you and everything is really such a big thing. But, you know, hopefully the more we have these conversations, more people like you are talking about, hey, like, you don't have to just sit on the couch all day because your doctor said you can't do anything. There are options, there are levels, there are treatments, there are all these things that we can do. We can, like you said so eloquently in the beginning, is that we can meet you where you are instead of where we think you should be or where you have to be. Like, let's find that place where you are and get you to where you want to be. And I think that that's such a big thing that more and more people are working toward because we're tired of being told no.
Yeah, it's so invalidating. It's just so invalidating to hear that from our clinicians and not even to have other options given. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, I want to run. And they're like, just no. Okay, well, the conversation could be, well, what does that look like for you? And
Mhm.
okay, well, maybe we're not ready for that right now, but let's look into a walking program or
Yep.
just different things like that. But to be completely shut down, so frequently, I think for so many of us, I have a
Mhm.
lot of clients who they're providers who aren't necessarily well versed in the active space or in their chronic illness, where they do kind of stop asking them those questions and more just saying, "Hey, this is what I'm, doing," and not to say go against medical advice, but I think sometimes we need to recognize that this advice isn't always the best advice across the board. And
Mhm.
oftentimes we have to just seek other answers, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yep. It's it's that same thing. It's that good old trial and error that no patient will ever get away from. But I think things feel like they're changing because more people are being vocal and more people are doing things and talking about doing things and not just saying, look at me, but they're like, hey, this is how I did it. Let's chat. And that's a beautiful thing. But
Absolutely. I agree.
yeah. So thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been great, and thank you for being my source of information for years, even though you didn't know it. So thank you. Uh,
Absolutely. I'm so glad to hear that it's been helpful.
but I think this has been a great conversation, and I hope that everybody who's tuning in will really say, "Hey, there might be something I can do, like, let me check it out." So, I'll say, like, DMs are always open, we love talking about this stuff. So, hopefully we'll get more people out there moving and realizing that they can get out there and move.
Yes, I love to chat with people. So please jump in my DMs. You can always shoot me a message or you can find me at my website. It is www.therunningdpt.com. If you are interested in talking about working together, you can fill out a contact form and chat with me through there.
Perfect. Thank you.